Origin Chess, and this is All Arguments for God, explained in 10 minutes. Vajra Redeem Zoomer. Yes, another explained video. I like explained video from Redeem Zoomer, basically religious topics, obviously. Christianity, yeah, obviously, why not? So, All Arguments for God, explained. I'm guessing he's going to talk about here like how certain people argue against God and how religious people, talk about God. I don't know what he's going to talk about here. When it comes to God, is basically religion always goes with the faith, like have faith, right? Uh, Look, I think like in anything we say, just having one linear thought of anything, like you should just believe on what, just basically anything, like anything religious. Look, faith in God makes sense, but faith in like full-blown religion, everything has nuance, everything has context. So I don't like things like just have faith, the end, because that leads to really problematic things. Like you need to know where you should have faith and where you should not, right? And if you just live around religion and just think about that, just like think about faith and that's it, you don't have like nuance about things, context about things, you're gonna start having faith in everything. You're gonna start believing like, oh, like Area 51 is aliens or something, right? Obviously I'm talking about extremes here. People who don't do that good on IQ type of way, not like average or above average people. Obviously they can see they can differentiate where it's religious faith and where it's everything else, but still there is like an element of people where would have problem, right? They see like, oh, there are like reptiles are among us and shit like that. I don't know why, because I have faith. No, that's not the faith thing, right? Look, believing God makes sense, right? Because unless you have answer of everything, there's always going to be lingering question, and somehow our human nature always points to like there has to be some intelligence thing behind everything, right? That is the most basic way I can think of. So yeah, people like to think of God in that way, but people's interpretation and version of gods are many different. But yeah, I don't know what he's going to talk about here, but it's going to be interesting. So yeah. Remember, if you like my don't forget to subscribe. So I know we start videos react to more. You'll be helping out this channel by doing that. I like like deep dive into things like this, because I didn't know much about Christianity. The more I watch Redeem Zoomer videos, the more I'm like understanding things better. And I guess like I'm Hindu, obviously born Hindu. So I know how things work in my religion, but it's really interesting to see like Abrahamic. I didn't know there was like a layer of. For a long time I didn't know that like Islam and Christianity has anything to do with each other, right? I didn't even know that. But then I realized there's like Abrahamic religions that's like kind of like tied together, like same God and things like, oh, that's interesting. So let's watch one.
Unless you're raised in a Baptist Sunday school, you probably think that if you believe in God, you should be able to explain why. Luckily, Christians and other philosophers have been answering this question for over 2,000 years. Evidentialism tries to argue for God by giving evidence of supernatural events. For example, a lot of Christians think the resurrection of Christ can be historically proven because there were a lot of eyewitnesses who all died for their faith, and generally people don't die for something they know isn't true. Sometimes people give evidence of supernatural things like demonic possessions, where people start speaking in languages they don't know, or near-death experiences where people see things outside their body that they shouldn't have been able to see. The
martyr thing is not really, because obviously that's what he means, but I don't know if he means that or not. But like nobody would die if they don't believe in something. They could believe in the idea of it, like whether that's Jesus was real, all the things were real or not, whether that's real or not, they like the concept of it, they like the idea of that religion, so they could become martyr for that as well. So it's not just about that, but yeah. So that argument doesn't work.
The moral argument is basically, objective morality is only real if God is real, but objective morality is real, so therefore God is real. Question, is cannibalism good or bad? I think it's good. I think it's bad. I think it's good. I think it's bad. Which one of them is correct? Now, I'm assuming you agree with this one. If you don't, please stay away from me. But how do you know that he's actually correct?
Why did he draw the cannibalism or green guy in green and not a green guy in red. Like, that's like our mind with visual cues. That doesn't work right.
You know that these aren't just different opinions. Our little friend here can only be objectively correct if there's a supreme authority that says cannibalism is bad. And that supreme authority is what we would call God. The
Really? Cannibalism bad. Why? Because you're eating somebody who's like you. Is basically like, why would you not punch somebody? Because if you get punched, you don't like it, so you don't punch somebody. You don't want to get eaten by another human, so you don't eat another human. It's like not right. Yeah.
logical argument is basically that something must have caused everything else. Everything that happens has a cause, and that has a cause, and that has a cause. So where does this go? Does this go on forever? That's not possible. At some point, there needs to be a first cause of everything else. There needs to be an unmoved mover, an uncaused causer, an unchanged changer. It needs to be eternal, because if it ever starts or stops existing, that's change, and it can't do that. It needs to be outside the universe, because everything in the universe is caused. It also needs to be all-powerful, because if it can't be moved, but it can move anything else, that means it's all-powerful. And this is what we would call God. I don't get it. Okay, let's make it even harder then. Everything is a mixture of act, meaning what it is, and potency, meaning what it could be. For example, a baby actually is alive, and it could be an adult. An apple actually is red, and it has the potency to be eaten. So if you eat an apple, you're actualizing its potency to be eaten. But you also are a mixture of act and potency. For example, you have the potency to be strong, but you're not. Anytime something changes you, it's actualizing a potency in you. Anytime a change happens, you have one thing actualizing another, but you can't go back forever, so eventually you need to go back to an unactualized actualizer, which we call God. God is the being that's pure act, meaning he is everything that he possibly could be. This means he must be eternal, because if he's not eternal, that means he has the potential to not exist, but there is no potential in God, so that means God must always exist. Also, if God is everything he could be, he's also all-powerful, because he cannot change, and that means nothing else could possibly do anything to God. This argument's the most...
Yeah, okay. I don't know why he was like tiptoeing and just like always explaining the simplest way, right? Every laws of physics we have works, right? Works everywhere. There is not a place where laws of physics doesn't work. So if you like peel through everything, you come to origin of things, right? Slow and so you just like peel through things like laws of physics. There must be first thing that can't be explained by laws of physics. If it is explained by laws of physics, that's not the first thing, is it? Because probably has another beginning. So if you like peel through and just go to the complete origin of things, that thing cannot be explained by laws of physics. That thing must be like the, whatever you want to call it, like whether intelligence, eternal, whatever. That must be God. That's the argument he's trying to make here, right? So like all this, like, I don't know. So basically laws of physics, everything, but the first thing cannot be explained by laws of physics. That's the point. If it can, that's not the first thing. So, like you can explain why gravity works. You can explain why is there gravity. Like, okay, objects have gravity, like mass has gravity. Why? Okay, I don't know what you're asking me. So science explains how. Why an origin, why is there something, why are the laws of physics, these are not explained. I don't think can be explained. So you can say it like that, like the first things cannot be explained by laws of physics, must be God or something.
Complicated. It's originally from Aristotle, and it's also used by Thomas Aquinas in Summa Contra Gentiles. Pascal's wager is much simpler, and it's more of a thought experiment than an argument. Let's say you're an atheist, and atheism turns out to be correct. Nothing happens after you die. Well then, you don't really gain or lose anything, it's just kind of neutral for you. But let's say you're an atheist and it turns out you're wrong and God is real, then it could be very bad for you. Now let's say you believe in God and it turns out atheism is correct, well then you still don't gain or lose anything, it's just neutral. But if you believe in God and God is real, then you could gain everything. So between these two possibilities...
See, I understand this like better safe than sorry. Like if you're atheist and God is real, you're screwed. But if you believe in God and like there was no God, at best you just believe in some imaginary things. Okay, you can see it like that, but then again, that's like saying believing in God and having this faith in religion has no downsides. Like I said in the start of the video, there's many downsides to it, just having the element of just you should have faith. Like just the concept of faith is kind of dangerous. If you apply it in right way, sure. But if you can differentiate where you should have faith or not. So basically, believe in God is mostly comes down to faith. And faith in self is dangerous. So, Pascal's wages doesn't take that into account, does it?
Which one do you want to bet on? This one gives you a much better chance, so it's better for you to believe in God. The teleological argument says that stuff in the universe seems to have a purpose, so that means the universe must have had a designer. If you found a machine lying around, you would assume that somebody designed the machine. So the teleological argument tries to argue that the universe works like a machine, so somebody must have designed the universe. Things in nature, like the human cell or the ecosystem of the world, are very complex and they work like a machine. Now, Darwinian evolution can explain why that is, but there's also things Darwinian evolution can't explain, like the 4 constants of the universe. There are physical constants like the gravitational constant and the electron charge, the strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force that are perfectly fine-tuned, such that if they were even the slightest bit different, the entire universe would immediately collapse in on itself. The ontological
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. Basically, this is how evolution explains things, right? You're like, okay, why is this thing just perfectly works? Isn't that an intelligent design? That's because other 99 version of it that didn't work perfectly died out. Basically, something like that. Let's say our universe is just fine-tuned like it's have 4 force. Another universe that wasn't fine-tuned collapsed. You can think it like that, right? A lot of species that is alive today, way too many species died because they weren't perfect enough to survive. So obviously right now we are observing the result. We would think like, oh, this is too perfect, right? No way, just like, oh, this happens to be this, just happened to work. Thing that didn't work don't exist anymore. That's why you can't see. You're just seeing the result that worked. And you're like, okay, if all this works and everything works, that means it must be, I'm not sure that's the argument. I don't know.
argument says God exists because of the way he is. Bruh. No, seriously. God is defined as that than which nothing greater can be conceived. That means God must be all-powerful, because being all-powerful is greater than having limited power. God must be all-knowing, because being all-knowing is greater than having limited knowledge. God must be all-good, because being all-good is greater than being flawed. And God must exist, because existing is greater than not existing. Wait, just because we can think of a greatest possible being doesn't mean it actually exists. Well, actually it does, because existing in reality is greater than just existing in the mind. Okay, but I could use that to argue for the existence of the greatest possible pizza. Well, actually, no, you can't, because the definition of pizza implies limitations like a limited size and able to be broken. If you had a pizza that was indestructible, eternal, all-powerful, and infinitely large, it wouldn't be a pizza anymore, it would just be God. Basically, if your pizza gets infinitely great, it'll turn into God. There is also the argument from personal experience.
Yeah, but all that expression also starts with certain criteria, isn't it? Like, I don't know.
It may sound silly, but everyone does see the world through the lens of their own personal experience. A lot of people are convinced God exists either because of supernatural events they've seen, or because of answered prayers, or just coincidences in their life. So this is very good at convincing oneself that God exists, but not very good at convincing other people. The transcendental argument basically says without God, nothing can make sense at all. There's a lot of things we assume, but we can't prove. We assume that logic works. We assume that there's consistency in the natural world. We assume that truth exists, but we can't prove any of these things scientifically, because these are the basic assumptions we need to make to even do science. All of these things make sense if we presuppose a worldview where God exists, because then we can say all these other things are grounded in the mind of God. But if God doesn't exist, then we have no justification for the things we assume, and everything just collapses. There is the argument.
See, the problem with all this is science doesn't say that there is no God, right? Science only says that we have no reason to think of a God, so let's not talk about it type of way, right? One thing we realize that humans have flaws, right? Even our vision can have flaws. Everything we experience, all of our senses can be duped, let's just say, right? There's anomalies everywhere, right? So our senses don't work as great and as perfect as we like to think. So that's why in science, any testimony of anything acquired by human senses is like thrown outside, because our senses are not perfect. Now everything, whether you try to, either oh, I've seen something. No, that doesn't work. I'll make an argument for something using our brain. Again, even that can, like, a lot of psychological issues and this and that. Our brain is not perfect, so even those arguments doesn't work. All the points you can think of, none of that works. Science doesn't take that into account because we are flawed, right? So science doesn't say there is no God. Science just says we have no reason to think. That's it. The days scientific tools and, like, things like that can even come close to getting to the point, wait a minute, there might be God, science might, like, warm up to it. It's not like science will never say there is God, right? If anything even come close to, like, explain that, science will start to make another chapter. Okay, God, like creator. Okay, let's talk about that. Like, what's a scientific subject about that? Science is literally everything, right? That's the point. So every time somebody argues about anything, it's like your argument itself, I might not take it because human mind is flawed. Basically, that's the point.
From the mind, or consciousness, which says consciousness cannot be explained naturally. Generally, the atheist explanation of consciousness is that our brain is just a very advanced biological machine, but unlike our minds, machines can be reduced to their parts. Now, our brain can be reduced to its brain cells, but that's not the same as the experience of consciousness. For example, you could find a part of our brain that sees the color yellow, but that's not the same as the experience of seeing yellowness. You cannot study consciousness scientifically because one can only observe one's own consciousness. For example, there is no way to know if we all see the same colors. Who knows, maybe yellow looks like this to me. For all you know, you could be the only person who exists.
See, the consciousness, obviously we don't understand consciousness, but then again there is also argument, is there a consciousness? It's just like enough complicated, let's just say complicated mixture of things that we perceive as consciousness, right? Look at how, like, AI is getting better and better, right? There was an AI very recently who was given a job, who went out its way to hire a human that he wasn't trained to do. It was said that don't lie, and it still lied to get its job done. So what is consciousness? Maybe it's just complicated mixture of things that just becomes consciousness, right? Maybe there is no criteria of consciousness. Things becomes enough complicated in processing way, it's consciousness. Who knows?
A single atom is not conscious. Two atoms are not conscious. A bunch of atoms are not conscious. So even if you have a complex system, it's still just a complex arrangement of atoms which are not conscious. So where does consciousness come from? So this isn't exactly an argument for God, but it is an argument for the human soul because it shows you need something immaterial to explain consciousness.
No,
Then
really.
there's the argument from mathematics, which says there's an infinite reality higher than our physical universe. So basic math isn't all that special. For example, the number 5 corresponds to 5 apples, and 5 times 3 corresponds to 3 groups of 5 apples. But the more you get into advanced math, the more math starts to get disconnected from our world, but it still works. For example, there's real numbers, which are numbers that correspond to real things, but there's also imaginary numbers that are just as mathematically real, but they don't correspond to the real world, which is why they're not called real numbers. But they still exist mathematically, even though they don't exist in the real world. Let's look at the 5 most important numbers in mathematics. 1 is obviously important because it's the basis for all real numbers. 0 is very important because it's necessary for doing algebra. I is very important because it's the basis for all imaginary numbers. E is very important for doing exponential functions, and pi is necessary for doing math with circles. Now, all these numbers are seemingly unrelated to each other, but they fit together beautifully in this equation called Euler's identity. It was discovered by Euler, one of the greatest mathematicians in history, and he saw this as proof that math was designed by God.
This is like getting impressed by seeing magic tricks. Math is a tool we created. We made it more complicated as we went along. We made it in a way that it fits things that we want to do. It's basically a tool, right? So it's not really surprising when given certain criteria, tools just come full circle, right? Oh, that's how did that happen? Math is not something you found in basically in nature. It's something we created to understand nature. Math also has its flaws. Math explains a lot of things that doesn't exist in real world. So why are you using math as anything to explain God? That is he's just like, oh, this is so complicated, I can just argue this way because of its complication, and like how it just like works perfectly given certain criteria, it's created by God. No, that's not how it works.
Also, Euler was a devout Calvinist. More evidence that math has a designer is the Mandelbrot set, which is generated by a very simple equation in the complex plane, but it produces infinite detail. You can keep...
Man, there are infinite numbers, right? There are a lot of like combination of things, multiplication of things that will give you infinite numbers. That's like limitation of mathematics. So I'm not surprised certain combination also give you something like this. That is not like something, that's not something like that. Come on.
Zooming in on this shape, and it will keep generating more and more complexity, even though nobody designed it.
It's multiplication, of course it will.
The Mandelbrot set is infinite, and it's not found anywhere in our universe, so that means whatever created it must also be infinite and not from our universe. So those are the common arguments for God, and by the way, this video wasn't intending to make any of these arguments. It would take a much longer video to do any of these arguments justice. It's just to give you guys an overview of these arguments so you can look more into them yourselves if you want. And now it's time for the best argument of all, which is...
Trust me, bro. That is the only argument. Trust me, bro. Faith, right? Everything he said here, like, some of them I can see that, right? Like the one I said, like, if everything's laws of physics, the origin cannot be it. That makes sense to me, sure. In a way, if I go through like Occam's razor type of mentality, simplicity, without thinking too much. Simplicity is also important, right? Like I said, human limitation, we have our flaws. Sometimes we go too much complicated route that we end up with something that doesn't exist in the real world. Like I said, people have used mathematics to talk about things like tachyons and things that doesn't exist in the real world. So yes, people even argue certain mathematics of here, certain mathematics of there. Just like this must exist in like certain wormhole in the future, this and that. Like you're taking too many leaps already, right? You're using like certain mathematics that's not proven yet. So you can't just like, basically something like that. So simplicity is also important. But all this like using mathematics to explain God's, like mathematics is a tool, right? A lot of example given here is based on multiplication. Multiplication means that, right? Multiplication can generate infinities, which is like a lot of arguments you made here. That doesn't work, man. So I don't know. I can see certain arguments of his, but like mathematics and things like that, no. But yeah, trust me, bro, is the ultimate one, like faith. If you want to believe in God, have faith. Because one thing's for damn sure, you're not going to realize if God is real or not scientifically anytime soon. Definitely not until you're alive, or even your children's lives. Probably will take way too long. Even if that, there's a real feeling in scientific community. We might not be like smart enough or might not have tools enough to like go to all the way to the origin, right? We might stop. We are already stopped right now, right? String theorists and people like that already argue like certain things that we want to like explore would require a massive particle accelerator, like like the orbit of moon or something. That's how big particle accelerator. We are not making that, right? And even more than that if you want to go beyond that. So yeah. Yeah, trust me, bro, is the ultimate one. Alright, well, that was all arguments for God explained in 10 minutes. If you like my next one, don't forget to subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you next time.